Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the Chief Inspector of Prisons has demanded that Nottingham Prison be placed under emergency measures after declaring the jail as fundamentally unsafe. It's the first time that Peter Clarke has had to place the Justice Secretary on notice that prison conditions have got so bad they require immediate action. The Minister now has 28 days to improve safety at the jail, which has seen 8 deaths in 2 years, as well as high levels of self-harm, drugs and violence. Here's our senior Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel.
This is nothing less than a prison in crisis, a jail trapped in a vicious cycle of violence, drugs and deaths. The past 2 years have seen investigations into the deaths of 8 prisoners.
When you have 8 apparently self-inflicted deaths in a comparatively short period of time, that raises the most serious questions.
And what prompted inspectors pressing the alarm button was the fact that virtually nothing was being done to improve the safety of the hundreds inside. In a letter to the Justice Secretary, the Chief Inspector of Prisons, Peter Clarke, wrote, "It appears that the problems at Nottingham are intractable and that staff there are unable to improve safety despite the fact that this failing increases the vulnerability both of those who are held in the prison and of those who work there." This is the first time the Inspectorate has used the urgent notification system to trigger immediate action. It comes on the day the new Justice Secretary was sworn in as Lord Chancellor. David Gauke has 28 days to respond and 6 years of decline to try to put right. Some believe this is about much more than just one Category B prison.
A high number, but also this was a prison forewarned about the serious failings in care and the dangerous state of the prison. And I think what this points to is a total abrogation at all levels of the prison system and at government to deal with the crisis within our prison system.
The Chief Inspector said staffing was not the problem at the prison. An MOJ statement tonight said 100 extra prison officers had been recruited, but promised an action plan within a month.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Chief Inspector of Prisons, Peter Clarke, and I began by asking him why he felt he needed to take this step.
I've taken this very serious step because, quite simply, the last 3 inspections of Nottingham Jail have said that it is fundamentally unsafe, and nothing really sensible has been done to try to rectify that. And the tragic point about this is the injuries that have been suffered by both prisoners and staff, and most seriously, in the last 2 years there have been 8 deaths which would appear to be self-inflicted, and this raises really very serious questions as to whether any of those deaths were preventable.
So what does the Justice Secretary have to do now? Does he have to send in a new team of management, or what?
No, I've specifically said that actually changing the management at Nottingham is probably not the answer to this. What I have said, and what the process now requires, is that within 28 days the Justice Secretary must say publicly what it is that he's going to do to improve the situation at Nottingham.
But what could they do other than change the management? And why shouldn't they change the management, given, as you say, you know, previous inspections have highlighted the problems?
Well, we make the point in the letter and in our report in due course that, of course, the management has changed far too often at Nottingham in the past. And there is currently a very enthusiastic, dedicated team working at Nottingham, and they need some stability. And what they really need is leadership and support from the prison service above them. That's what they desperately need. They've got a lot of new staff there. Shortage of staff is not the problem at Nottingham. They need support to get the basics right, to make the place safe and decent again.
And what are the basics? When you say getting the basics right, what do you mean?
Well, very simple basics, like, for instance, there are body-worn video cameras available in the prison, but they've never implemented them. They're not recording the use of force properly. They're not properly interviewing to identify vulnerabilities people who are new into the prison, and they take in about 100 new prisoners each week. And that's when prisoners are at their most vulnerable, in their early days in the prison. And repeatedly, what we found is that there's not sufficient care being taken, and the Prison and Probation Ombudsman, who investigates deaths in custody, is also, I know, very concerned that the reports they publish have not been taken seriously enough and their recommendations not implemented.
How many other prisons are almost as bad?
Well, time will tell as we go forward with this process how often I have to use it. I hope I don't have to use it very often. But there are other prisons within the last few months that had this process been in place, I would have thought very seriously about invoking this procedure, because quite simply there are too many prisons that are not holding prisoners in safe and decent surroundings.
Your predecessor, Nick Hardwick, when he left, talked about the risk of prison horror fatigue in your job, of getting used to the idea of prisoners committing suicide. You clearly are very keen to avoid that in your own case.
Well, I'm certainly not going to start taking for granted any concept that a death in prison is not something that should be taken with the utmost seriousness. What I do see in prisons is something that sometimes staff seem to become inured to appalling conditions. They come to accept it as normal, that living conditions should be disgraceful, that prisons should be unsafe, that they should be full of drugs, that there should be so much self-harm and so much self-inflicted death. We have to make sure that actually that doesn't become the norm, that people accept and understand that this is totally unacceptable, and do everything in their power to improve it.
Peter Clarke, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I've been